see, is it working? Yeah, I think it is. Hang on a minute. Just gonna see if I can wait for Jackie to come on to see if she can hear. I'm having some trouble with my volume, so I have to be really careful not to cover it. So, okay. So tonight's Facebook Live from Parent Plus is about sex and how to talk to your children about sex. I really just kind of answer any questions that you might have, or to, I suppose, just kind of give you a little bit of an insight into, based on some of the stuff that I know. So I'm just pulling up my blanket. I'm a bit chilly tonight, so I've got my blanket on. Look like a little old lady, actually. Look, my feet up, chilling. Okay, so I'm just still waiting to see if Jackie pops up to see that she can hear me properly. She's obviously engrossed in the football instead of watching. So, okay, I'll get started. Why did I decide to talk about sex and children? It is something that I get asked about from parents. It's also something that comes up in, looks like someone's come up there. Is that you, Jackie? Show us, if you're on there as well, put a comment or say hi so I can see that people are, oh, there it is you, Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Jackie, give me a shout if the volume goes a bit funny, because I just seem to keep accidentally putting my finger over it. I'm trying really hard not to. So the reason that I've decided to do this on sex is because I think it can be a pretty taboo subject, and a subject that, as adults, people can find difficult to discuss and talk about. So it's even more difficult then to talk to your children about it. Thanks, Jackie. Okie dokie. So it's really just to kind of give people a little bit of a helping hand in, you know, how you might tackle it and some of the things that maybe other parents have been concerned about, that kind of thing. So, because I think it's really important that actually that sex is not a taboo topic. I mean, obviously there's times and places and there's appropriate ways, and it's got to be age appropriate and all that kind of thing. But I just think as a topic, as a whole, it's kind of often seen as quite taboo, and can be quite a lot of shame attached to it. Like, oh, it's a bit, a bit of shame talking to our children about sex, or scared about talking to children about sex. But it's a really important part of life, and some people may sit there laughing thinking, oh, I'm not bothered about sex. But, at some stages in people's lives, it might not always be the same, but, sex is a part, it's how we reproduce, it's how we have children, and it's also part of loving intimate relationships. So it's a really important subject, and one that I know that people find difficult. So if I was to kind of start with the official line, and if anybody that's a kind of a teacher or been in schools, they'll know way more than I know about this. But if you go on kind of like the government websites and have a look, it can be a bit confusing actually, because it says that they start talking about sex from the age of 7, but then it says that it's compulsory from the age of 11. So I'm assuming most places don't, or most educational establishments don't start talking about sex until they're a little bit older. But also it's interesting for me that it's also it's even though they say it's compulsory, in schools from the age of 11, parents are also allowed the option to withdraw their children from any kind of sex education. And this might be a little bit controversial, but I feel, and this is just my personal opinion, but that leaving it to age 11 is not too late, in the sense that I think, oh, they need to know before because they're going to be having sex before they're 11. I don't mean in that sense, but I think children are talking about sex, what is it, words associated with it, a lot younger than 11. And I'm talking about 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age. So I do feel that it's something we could tackle actually sooner than the age of 11. So when school look at it, they break it down into categories, and actually I think it's quite useful to look at it like this. So you're looking at reproduction, sexuality and sexual health. Now, I think it's a good way to look at it in a sense, because you can break it down, and what you tell them might vary according to their age. So, for example, sexuality is, I think Jackie would have spoken about identity in her ages and stages, and actually, sexuality becomes really important when you're talking about children's identity. But then, for example, things like sexual health is much more important when they're actually starting to form relationships. So Does an 8, 9-year-old need to know about sexual health? Probably not, I would have thought. So again, it's not just talking to your children about sex. Do you discuss sex or do you not? There's loads of different parts to that, and it might be that some parts of it is appropriate at a certain stage and other parts of it isn't appropriate. By the way, if anyone is listening and you want to ask any questions, even if you're just watching the recording, please feel free to ask some questions below. I'm really quite happy just to try and answer your questions ad hoc. So don't be thinking, oh, I've got to talk about sex now. I've got to talk about all of it. It's just, so you might just start off talking about the reproduction side of things. That, the question that a lot of parents will get asked first is, where do babies come from? How do you make babies? And then talking about sexuality is a lot more complex. It's even complex for a lot of adults because, again, you're talking about identity. And it might depend on your family circumstances. Jack is saying, don't forget to comment and say hi. Hi. So, it might depend on your circumstances. So, for example, my brother-in-law is gay. And I was just going to say has always been gay then, which sounds funny. So my daughter has recognised the word and used the word gay for, well, as long as she's been talking, really, because it's not something that would have felt, oh, she can't know about this, she can't, that is her uncle's sexuality, and that's that. It's, so we've always been really open about it, and why wouldn't we be? So it will be easier for some than others, depending on your family circumstances. But it's not just about whether somebody's gay, straight, bisexual. We're talking there about, you're involving feelings and emotions, really. So I think this area of sexuality is going to be something that comes up time and time again, and that you kind of go back to and revisit numerous times, depending on what age they're at. So, and as I said before, sexual health is thinking more about when they're having starting to form relationships, and it's about managing risk. I think it's really important just to mention that don't assume that your kids are going to hear about sex or hear the word sex or anything like that at the same time that you did when you were younger. Times have changed massively, and I'm not saying this to frighten anybody or to put the fear in you that your children are going to be going out and having sex at really young ages. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But times have changed in the sense that, look, I'm sat here doing a video that people can access live on Facebook. Social media, mobile phones, the advancement in technology has had an impact on sex, and also about what children know and how quick they know it, and how fast and how instantly they can share information and access each other. I remember, I'm not really even that, I'm not that old. I'm not even 40 yet. But if I wanted to speak to a friend after school or a boyfriend, then it would be on the home phone at home, and I wouldn't have had access to all of this kind of instant communication. So I think the risks have increased, but equally their awareness and their things popping through on my phone. I should turn my notifications off. That through their awareness is that's getting a lot quicker and a lot. I hear the word Snapchat. Now I'm not on Snapchat, but I've heard it from a lot of young people. It just horrifies me how instant they can send pictures, and that it's not even that easy to trace back. So people become a lot braver in what they're sending. And again, I'm not a prudish person, but some of the things, that you hear about that they're happy to share and how they share it, it's a totally different environment. But that's a whole other subject in itself. And actually, online is probably something that myself and Jackie should cover as well. So how do you go about talking to your children about sex? Well, you have to be calm. I would say go with the flow, and don't assume that you know what it is that they want to know. Don't assume that they're wondering about the same things that you would have done at that age, or they're going to think about sex, sexuality, reproduction in the same order that you did. It's going to depend on so many different things, and I would just encourage you to kind of explore their thinking. So, you know, if they ask you a question about sex, of which I've been asked, I've got a 8-year-old, nearly 9-year-old. I'm not going to share what she's asked me because she does sometimes look me up on YouTube, and I wouldn't want her to breach her confidentiality. So I won't share the specific questions. However, what I can share is kind of the process that I went through in order to kind of help with that, which is explore their thinking. If they're asking you a question, ask them what it is that's making them ask you that. What is it that they want to know? So almost like saying, okay, you tell me what it is that you know, and I'll try and help you fill in any gaps where I can. Because the one thing I found is what I assumed I was being asked. Luckily, I didn't jump straight into answering because I was completely misunderstood the question. And thankfully, I would have shared far too... Well, I wouldn't have shared it, but I would have probably had a bit more of a horrified reaction of, oversharing at an age where actually maybe she doesn't want to know X, Y, and Z just yet, but actually she's got some questions. So just make sure you clarify exactly what it is that they're asking you, and maybe the purpose and the reasons behind that. It might be that other people have spoken about things, and that they're trying to kind of fill in some gaps of things that they've heard at school. So it's about us trying to help them fill in the gaps, and doing that really, I would say, at their own pace when they're ready. So I suppose you say, well, why bother? Just leave it till they're 11, and then, we can worry about it then. Let school deal with it. Okay, which to a degree is fine if that's what you'd rather do. But children are talking about these things. They are asking questions around each other. Some children will have more knowledge than other children. The level of knowledge, the level of naivety, the level of, I suppose, innocence in a way is going to vary massively. It varies between boys and girls and how they approach things and different ages. So, but my concern for me as a parent, and again, it may not be a concern for you, but if you don't talk to them about sex at a time when it's appropriate and you leave it till the last minute, they're going to make their own mind up. So you might think, well, what's wrong with that? They can have their fantasy of, the stork comes and brings the baby, which is all fine, but there'll come a point at school where other children are going to give them more information than that, and actually it's a lot younger than I would have anticipated that they start having these conversations. And the other thing that sometimes concerns me about children working this out for themselves, between themselves in the playground, because there's a few people on there now, so say hi so I can see who it is, and feel free to ask any questions. So when they're in the playground and they're discussing it with each other, they come up with all sorts of really wonderful stories of how people have sex. And we can laugh about it, and it's quite funny. But there is kind of a serious side to it, in the sense that children really believe each other. I don't know about you, but sometimes... Hi, Wendy. Sometimes children really believe each other because they think, well, why would we lie to each other? We're friends, and they really value their relationships, and they really trust each other to a degree where, they kind of think, oh, well, if my best friend tells me, then it must be true. But they're all getting little bits of information from different places as well. So an example is, I don't know, so I've heard loads of different examples of what children think sex is, but so one of them might be that you get naked and you don't have clothes on and you lie in bed and you lie next to each other. Okay, so there's one example. Sounds really innocent. Might think, actually, I'm really happy that my child just thinks that that's it. However, where you can then sometimes have the problems, particularly in big families, is, my daughter has cousins, little cousins, who are potty training, who are at the stage where they want to run around with their bits out. And, that's fine. And I don't want to be saying to my daughter, oh, you can't go near them because they've got the bits out. Now, she may watch TV, be watching a film with them, and they're climbing all over her, and, they've got their bits out, and their bits are going to touch bare skin. I don't want my child thinking that she's then had sex, because she hasn't. Okay, so what can sometimes happen is the bits of information that they piece together, you've got to remember that it comes from a really young place in their head, that they then fill in the little gaps. And, imagine then them thinking, oh, well, my cousin rubbed up against my bare skin with his private parts, so I've had sex. And then other people at school saying stuff, and they're in their heads thinking, oh, I think I might have had sex. Now, it might sound really far-fetched, but for 8 and 9-year-olds, it's not far-fetched to them. It's like, oh, what if I have? And then they've got people at school indicating to them that sex is a bad thing and it's naughty and we shouldn't talk about it. So all of that then mixed in is like, oh, what have I done? And have I done something wrong? And it's attached to all sorts of things. So that's why I think it's important to fill in those gaps once they start hearing it. And I've been so aware of it because I've been asked by my daughter recently about sex. So it's become much more of a forefront for me that of actually how frequently that the word sex even is used. So, on the radio at 8:30 in the morning, talking about people being convicted of sexual offences, so they're hearing the word sex, they're hearing the word sexual, and they're starting to wonder and inquire. So, there are some really negative sides to sex. There are some really awful situations, but also there's a lot of positives to sex. So, again, let us fill in those gaps for them, age appropriate, and just kind of so that they're not fantasizing or thinking, oh, I've done this, or I've seen my 2 little male cousins having sex because they're both running around with no nappies on and they've rubbed up against each other. It's kind of, we need to clarify a few things so that they're not filling in the gaps themselves and doing it in a way that makes it sound awful. Again, saying about accessing, I've known children to look up what sex is in the dictionary, and I don't know if you've ever done it. And again, this might just be about me because we've all got preferences. The other thing is things like even just talking about, I call them, me and my daughter call them private parts. I don't know where it came from because it's not something I used as young. I think she maybe once said it and then it just kind of stuck. But even if you just think for a woman's anatomy, I've heard, I think one of my nephews calls it a mini. I think when I was younger, I remember people calling it a tuppence. Then obviously we've got the official term, which is vagina, which again, some people, I'd rather call it something else. I don't know why. Again, that'll be my own historical thing. But we're going to have, that's funny, the person I was just talking about has just messaged through at the same time. It's a bit freaky. So, we all have different ways of talking about things and different preferences. And again, if you think about all the different children, say, for example, in your children's school, they'll all have different names for it. And so it's okay to kind of let them explore and the vocabulary and wonder what things are. So that's what I was saying, about forgot my thread then, about the dictionary definition. Again, for some people, you may prefer that. You may prefer the official line, or it comes from the dictionary, so it must be okay. But if you look it up, I don't know if anybody ever has. I don't know if Jackie, I think I might have mentioned this to Jackie before. But if you look up sex in the dictionary, it links you. This is the other thing now about online. It's not just paper. It links you from one thing to the next. And it when it talks about sex, it then refers you on to... Sorry, I was going to look at it on my phone, but I can't, obviously, because I'm on. It then refers you to sexual intercourse. Now, if you then look at what the definition is for sexual intercourse, to me, it sounds quite harsh. I can't remember it off by heart. I've not memorised it. But it's something about a man's erect... In fact, before I just say this, just a little warning, if any little ones are near you, I'm sure they're not, but that a man's erect penis penetrating the woman's vagina, then it talks about ejaculation and semen. Now, it's just giving you the official terms, but to me, it sounds really quite harsh and almost kind of, I don't know, almost too official in a way that it makes it really serious and it makes it sound awful. I mean, it might just be me, but it doesn't sound great. So again, would you ever think to not let your child access a dictionary? They are going to be able to find stuff out some way or other if they want to. So I would feel, it's better coming from yourself because you know them, you know what terms they use, you know what's too much for them to hear, how they might perceive things, and it's the best and the safest way is to come, I think, from yourself, because you can package it in such a way that suits them. So so that's the kind of I suppose my concern as a parent and as a therapist, I suppose, if we don't talk about it, that they then just explore for themselves and finding out. And they might not always like what they see or hear. So the other thing that's important is to think about your own relationship with sex and your own thoughts and views. So if we got, say, 10 of us parents in a room and said, right, what is sex? What's the point? What's the purpose? We'd all come up with different things. Some people might say fun. Some people might say to make babies. Some people might say it's just because it's what you've got to do. Some people might say it's important for X, Y, and Z. So we'll all have different opinions. And I'm not suggesting that, again, you know, I would not be saying to my 8 or 9-year-old that it's about fun. Do it very much from a reproductive, answering questions, how, you know, because of babies and where do they come and what does sex mean, so at a level where it's just about reproduction. Now, there's obviously then going to come a stage where it becomes more about emotional and relationships. I'll then explain that at a time that's appropriate. But what's really important to be mindful of, like I say, is your own views on it, because you'll kind of carry that when you're talking to them, and things that you might find a bit cringeworthy or a bit uncomfortable, or your views. It's important as best you can to separate yourself out from that and give them kind of an unbiased view of what it is and fill in the gaps for them kind of without, where possible, adding your history into it, really. So nobody's asked any questions. People have asked questions prior to this. One of them, I'm just having a look there on my notes. So, oh yeah, one of the questions that I was asked is, what if your children are kind of saying these words because they kind of think that they're a bit naughty and it's funny, and that they're kind of doing it potentially to get a reaction? Well, what I would say is, don't just assume that they're doing it to be naughty, but they may well be doing it to get a reaction, but it might be to gauge, actually, they might not fully understand the word or what it means. They've heard it, they get the sense that kids are really good at picking stuff up and sensing things. So they're getting the sense that, oh, this is a naughty word, or I shouldn't be using it, or it, you know, it relates to sex, or it relates to whatever it is. You know, they might be trying to actually gauge your reaction to help them fill in those gaps that I'm talking about, as in, do they fully understand it? What does it mean? Why are other people saying it? Is it an insult? Is it a rude word? What is it? So sometimes they can say it in front of you to gauge your reaction, because that will help them then fill in some of the gaps. So what I would say with stuff like that is, if they are kind of saying things in front of you or to friends and they're testing out, again, as you know, if they do something that you don't approve of and you've got consequences, and this is all again about managing behaviour, so I won't go into this, and do what it is that you normally do. But I would calmly as possible, be asking them, you know, what does that word mean that you've said, and try and explore with them what it is that they think it means, because it might be that you need to give them a little bit more of an explanation as to, again, filling in the gaps, like, in a curious way, because it might be that they don't fully understand really that it relates to sex as well, or it relates to this, or they might not fully get it. So then you've got the opportunity to explain to them why it's not always appropriate to use that word. And this is a tricky one, I think, relating to sex as well, because I don't know, I don't know if anyone remembers, I think it was an Iron Brew advert. I can't do a Scottish accent, but it was, a baby was born, and they'd called her Fanny. I was like, oh, Fanny, you're just like your granny. And I remember my daughter was then obsessed with the word Fanny for about 4 weeks, because she was old enough to know the adult's reaction in watching the advert. And it wasn't like an advert that was only on late at night, because Fanny is a name. Some people are christened and named Fanny. So, but to her, she very quickly picked up from people around her, oh, there's something a bit funny about this. I'll get a reaction from this. But she probably didn't quite understand what. I mean, as she's older now, she does. But so again, it's okay to kind of explain to children that, yes, something can be a name. Another one is the name Dick. I've had it again with my daughter. Oh, Dick. And then she gets older, she's looking as if to say, I know that's also a bad word. But actually, it is a name, and it is a word that used in context is not rude or derogatory, or so there's going to be a crossover, and it's a lot of it is about just explaining why certain words or certain terms can be appropriate in some circumstances and but then are not appropriate in others. So again, if it's about talking about sex and your child wants to understand a little bit more about what that is, it's okay to explain that. I can explain this to you and we can talk about it and you can ask me questions, but you're a bit older now, so it's okay for you to ask a little bit more, but be careful where you say it and who you say it to, because other people might not be at the same stage as you. So again, you can kind of big them up a little bit, really, and give them that responsibility to kind of have that information. So what else was I asked? There was another question. Oh yeah, somebody asked me about what stage would you discuss pornography with your children or with your teens. Now it's a bit of a tricky one, really, because again, I'm not sitting here saying that pornography is wrong, because that's not for me to say. And some people will have a preference for things like that and some people won't. Some people will use it to explore, but I'd say particularly for children and teens, particularly earlier teens, that again, because of the internet, because of what we can access, it can be quite a scary place, and it's very difficult to limit what people can find and can access. So if your children ask you about it and they use that word pornography or porn, or they describe it and you get the impression that they're interested in it or that a friend has spoken about it, I would talk about it. I wouldn't ignore it. However, I don't think I would necessarily instigate it, instigate that discussion. And I think the only way we can kind of protect our children from things like that, because it might be, there's stuff on the internet that would disturb even the most robust of adults if they started exploring. I remember once when my daughter first started playing on the iPad, she must have only been about 3 or 4, and she Google searched something about granny. I can't remember what it was, but there was a word and then granny, very innocently, because she was at a granny's house, and the stuff that came up was horrific, but luckily was sat right next to her and was able to get rid of it really quickly. So I think the key with stuff like protecting your children, if you're concerned about pornography and things like that, is it just boils down to your internet security and what's available for them to access. Again, they're going to access stuff on their phones. They're going to get hold of pornographic magazines with their friends. But again, if you educate them and talk to them about sex, knowledge is power in a way, and hopefully all you can kind of hope for is that you are open enough with them and talk to them enough to help them understand and be able to make good informed choices about what it is that they're interested in and their own preferences, really. So I don't want to kind of make this video too long. I'm trying to see how long it's been, but it's not letting me. I don't know if it's coming up. No, I can't find out how long it's been on, so I just don't want to kind of over egg it. But if anybody does, if this kind of brings up any questions for anyone you want to ask, on this topic, then please do send us a message or put comments or send a private message. But I suppose the biggest thing that I want to kind of get across with this is don't be scared of talking to your children about sex. It's a part of life. It's not this big, awful, scary thing. And the other thing is that I hear a lot, actually, is just because you talk to your children about sex doesn't mean you're encouraging them to go out and have sex. Kids are going to get to an age where they're going to do what they want to do. We can do our best. We can inform them as best as we can. But just because you're talking about sex isn't giving them permission to go out and have sex. It's a very, very different thing. So don't be afraid. It's a similar thing to when children are anxious. They don't want to explain what anxiety is to children because it might make them more anxious. It won't. That's not how it works, And it's the same with sex. Just because you talk about sex with your children and they understand it doesn't mean they're suddenly going to want to go out and have sex all the time, So, in actual fact, I'd probably say there'd be an argument for people that are less aware of sex and what it is and what it involves and the different parts to it and the different stages and, you know, the emotional side to it, people that have a lack of awareness in that area are probably more likely to go out and have sex without really thinking it through. So I would say don't be worried about it. Don't be afraid. If you are worried and concerned about it, you're certainly not going to be on your own in that. You know, I'm doing this video with you now, yet when I was asked recently and taken aback a little bit because I wasn't expecting it quite yet, to be asked about sex by my nearly 9-year-old, you know, I did have to kind of ground myself and think, right, okay, just be rational about this now, because it is a bit shocking when they ask. And then I had it a couple of weeks later again, and she said, you know, when you said you could tell, I could ask you anything. Well, could I ask you a few more questions about sex? And again, I'm like, but actually, it's really not that bad. So, yeah, if there's anything at all we can help you with, myself or Jackie, then... Sorry, it was just going to cut out then. You know, just feel free to ask us. I'm sure there's loads of resources out there as well, and books, and I've seen books, but again, some of them I don't really like, if I'm honest, and the pictures can be a bit graphic, and I think we can also overshare. Go at your child's pace. If your child is asking, answer. If your child isn't asking, okay, that's fine. You're not going to necessarily bring it up if they're not asking, but just be mindful of their age. And again, linking into what Jackie talked about in ages and stages, if you know that they're going to start thinking particularly about identity, you know, maybe it is something that if they're not going to bring it up, that you could broach at some point. You know, would it be such a bad question at a certain age to say, you know, when you decide it's right to say, you know, has anybody talked to you about sex yet at school? Do you know what it is? Or if you hear it on the radio, you know that word, do you understand what that is? You know, again, you're not going to suddenly throw them into this big sordid world because you've mentioned the word sex. So yeah, so if you can, you know, just try and be a bit brave and talk to your children, and fill in some of the gaps for them. Okay, so yeah, I'll leave it there. And as I say, any questions, give us a shout. Cheers.